Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very overdue live stream podcast from the swamp to the states. This is Americans for Tax Reform, state-focused podcast. We're talking about what's going on at the state level, how it's going to impact your wallet, how the political situation is looking, and we're very overdue. So it's mid-October. We got a lot going on. Elections are right around the corner. That will certainly change things, and then we'll head into sessions at the state level in January. And one of the big issues that has popped up in the past couple of years is ESG, environment, social, and corporate governance. And now we've seen Republican leaders across the country start to push back on these ESG policies. One of them is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who issued a resolution saying that state pension funds must consider investment returns above all else, above these ESG standards. So we're going to talk about this topic today. We're really fortunate to have Bryan Bashur, who's Americans for Tax Reform's financial services staffer. He's our lead on these policy issues. So Bryan's been tackling this issue. Bryan, welcome to From the Swamp to the States.
Thank you, Doug. Glad to be here.
And we should shortly be joined by Florida State Representative Bob Rommel, who's also tackling this issue. Busy. Representative Rommel represents parts of Southwest Florida, so certainly had a lot to deal with the hurricane there. So we should see him shortly, and he'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Florida as the state continues to lead on these conservative issues. So Bryan, let's start a little bit at the top. ESG, it's been around for a while, but it's certainly come to the public consciousness, at least my consciousness, much more in the past couple of years. So what does it mean, and why is it bubbling up now?
So previously it was known under a different label as a socially responsible investing. Now the acronym ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it's to answer that most clearly, there is no uniform definition for what ESG is. What's really happened is you have some of these ratings firms, S&P, Sustainalytics, Moody's, who have these, who are data analytics firms, and they create these indexes to categorize different investment funds, exchange-traded funds, different stocks, and they give them a score on an ESG scale. And in a lot of cases, what happens is, if you have a company that, has committed to going net zero by 2050, or maybe has a policy of having a certain number of minorities or women on their board, or, has other policies on, related to abortion or other social issues, they may have a higher ESG score. And what that plays into is then they get included into an overall index that then is used for when an asset management firm, which will manage these state pension assets, such as a BlackRock or Vanguard or State Street, they create these passive index funds, which are low-cost funds that track an index, a particular ESG index. And then what happens is, so these managers, they contract with the state pension fund. The pension fund hands over assets to the asset manager. They'll invest it in these funds, and that's if you're a firefighter, teacher, police officer, whatnot, that's your retirement money. So effectively, what's happening is, if you have a pension, if you're invested in a state pension, that's your life savings that's being invested by these firms. But what we've started to see is that a lot of these funds are not offering adequate returns. They're not necessarily maximizing returns for retirees. And there's a big debate about what's called fiduciary duty. And what ultimately needs to happen is, if a state pension fund board sees that there's been a breach of fiduciary duty, then this breach will happen if a fund is not investing with the sole interest of the retiree at the front of their mind. That's a breach, and they're not maximizing returns. And what needs to happen is those funds need to be removed from that firm and given to another management firm that is focused on their fiduciary duty of maximizing people's life savings.
I think so. And you talked a bit about what the issue scope is. I think in particular, energy and environment might be the biggest piece of this of late. I mean, we've seen energy prices skyrocketing. We have sort of an energy crisis, right? So the environment stuff seems like the biggest piece of this. Does that make sense to you? And what are there very successful sort of energy focused investments that are being left out by these funds while they focus on other stuff that maybe isn't as profitable? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, well, and actually, so there is some information out there basically showing the top 10 state pension funds that have the most assets managed by BlackRock that are actually invested in China and different Chinese firms. So instead of investing in American energy, they're investing in certain firms that have been tied to Uyghur slave labor. And to other firms that contract with the Chinese military. And Consumers Research has done a lot of good, has a lot of good data on this. But basically, it's not well known by a lot of people. But that's that is where instead of being invested in a traditional energy fund, it's going to offshore, and that's what a lot of people are arguing is causing a national security concern for the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, that certainly does not sound ideal. So where did this stuff come from originally? We were talking offline before we started that this is an old concept. So it's morphed into what we're seeing today. How long has this been around?
So I think I would say that it really started to show its face in the more modern sense around the time of apartheid in South Africa. There was, an initiative to invest not necessarily on, financial returns, but to, maybe invest, have options for people to maybe invest based on social criteria. What that's now kind of turned into is something that is in a lot of ways has become more of a PR stunt, but at the same time sacrificing retirees' life savings. And so what you've seen is certain asset management firms and you've seen some banks sign onto these international pledges, Climate Action 100 or the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And they sign these pledges basically saying that they're going to divest from traditional energy producers and commit to going to net zero by 2050 or whatever year is stated in the pledge. And what the problem with that is that it creates what's called a mixed motive. Basically, the idea that maybe there's a conflict of interest in that they are actually not solely focused on their clients, on the retirees that have their life savings being managed, but instead have this other ancillary criteria that they're considering. And so that would be a breach of fiduciary duty, and a lot of folks on the right believe that it is. I believe that it is, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, it's starting to quite a bit at the state level. In Florida, as Doug mentioned, they passed a resolution to prioritize financial returns for the state pension funds when investing and during proxy voting. And there's also been a lot of activity in Indiana and Kentucky, in Texas, West Virginia. There's been a lot of the state AGs have been very active, writing advisory opinions, basically outlining what some of these investment management firms are doing is a violation of state law.
One question on the states that have followed the ESG guidance. Do you have any sense of, are some of these state funds at least, do they have guaranteed returns that are backed by taxpayers? So if they make a bad investment decision, are they then going to come to taxpayers in the state and say, well, we're not able to provide the benefits we promised, so even though it's our own fault, but you guys are the ones who are going to have to pay the bill, right? We're not going to actually reduce the payout of the pension fund. Is that a thing?
So I think that so actually, if you look at California, the California public employee retirement system, they've actually been in trouble because they have been very much focused on ESG investing, and less on private equity. And there's a huge shortfall. And it was reported in Financial Times and in the Wall Street Journal, I think. Basically, the California retirement system, they admitted that they should have invested more in alternative assets, but instead were too focused on these ancillary ESG factors that really have nothing to do with getting returns to individuals in the here and now. And so they've been running into trouble. And then not, somewhat related, but you kind of see over in the United Kingdom, you've probably seen in the news that the pension funds over there have been investing in these liability-driven investments, basically derivatives. And it was actually, I think BlackRock, and in conjunction with the regulators over in the United Kingdom, had been telling the pension funds for a long time, oh, these are safe assets, you should invest in them. And what we're seeing now with interest rates rising is a fire sale, basically, and they're running out of liquidity. Margin calls are coming in, and the pension funds are in huge trouble over the United Kingdom. And so I think that over here, we would not want to do the same thing by telling pension funds, or pension funds themselves saying, oh, we need to go all in on ESG and nothing else, is that could cause a more systemic failure than what we can even perceive right now.
So, yeah, and we had a question from social media. I think we covered this, but maybe we can cover it in a different way and make sure this is important. And the question is, what are they, assuming the pension funds, prioritizing over financial returns?
So they're prioritizing, well, I'll say during proxy voting, what's happening is they're prioritizing, certain initiatives, certain shareholder resolutions that are not aimed at maximizing revenue for the firm, which in turn maximizes returns for the investor. And so you probably saw, I guess, a little over a year ago, back when there was the big proxy fight with ExxonMobil. There was a little hedge fund called Engine Number One that had a small stake in the company. And BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street also had stakes in the company, much larger stakes.
It's trying. I don't know for me.
We have you live now, Representative Rommel. Thanks for joining. Can you hear us okay? Maybe Bryan, please finish.
So anyway, what happened is that Engine Number One they wanted to put some people on the board that would focus more on a transition, more of a net zero transition, and they couldn't do it by themselves. So what they did is that they were able to get the big three, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, to get on board with the proposal, and they ended up succeeding in that and swapped out board members. And now what that does in turn is kind of set the trajectory of the firm to be more focused on an initiative that is not necessarily focused on maximizing returns. And you'll see that, and there were other companies, I think Lowe's and some others. There were some other shareholder resolutions related to policies on abortion things that, again, have nothing to do with the actual financial performance of the firm. And that's what is, by focusing on that so much above financial returns, that's what puts the returns of the pension funds and the retirees at risk.
And Bryan, let's tell folks where they can find some of your writing on this, and of course continue.
Hey, Doug, I don't know if you can hear me. I have a very poor connection.
We're starting to hear you.
Y'all can go to atr.org, or you can go to the Shareholder Advocacy Forum.org. The Shareholder Advocacy Forum is a group aimed at promoting individual investors, educating individual investors, or retirees, since retirees are invested in the stock market. So you can go on there, or you can and search for my stuff. Search my name, Bryan Bashur, Bashur. My last name is very uncommon, so if you just Google me, you'll be able to find things. So yeah.
Awesome. And we'll certainly keep Bryan on. So I think we have Representative Rommel online. Nope, there he goes. Just when you think we're getting there. So I want to turn to some of the responses Bryan was getting to a couple of minutes ago. We've talked, I think, framed pretty well what's going on with the ESG push, and we've had to see states and federal responses because this is interfering with the normal functioning of the market, essentially, and putting these funds at risk. And there's a discriminatory aspect to this too. So we have states and getting involved, and Florida is one of those states. And at the same time, there's a tricky question there, right, Bryan? Because we're talking about government intervention, and that can be dangerous. It can be done in a way that certainly goes too far. So what is the right approach on that? So Bryan, why don't you jump in? I mean, what are some of the basic principles for responding? How do legislators avoid and governors avoid going too far as they try to push back rightfully on some bad ideas here?
So the goal is to totally depoliticize investment decision making and proxy voting. And there's a good the American Legislative Exchange Council has a good model bill on this related to state pensions, and basically the goal of the bill is to require state pensions to focus on quote pecuniary factors when making investment decisions and when they're voting on proxies. And this is just to basically clarify that this is, the returns that you're aiming for and in law are to provide solely financial returns. And there is court precedent on that. Fifth Supreme Court case, Fifth Third Bank v. Dudenhofer, explicitly saying that the returns need to be financial in nature, not anything else. And so it's a very strict standard, and that needs to be clarified in law. And I think that I think a lot of the different states that are inclined to would benefit from passing legislation, if not identical, then very similar to the ALEC model bill. And so, I think that there are a lot of very capable state treasurers and state AGs that are aware of this and want to pursue it. And then there's the question you have on the other side too. You have, so what about California and New York that have AGs and treasurers that are not like that, and they just want to prioritize ESG. I think you'd have to look at the state law, and you'd have to see kind of what it says. I would assume that in a lot of cases what's in statute is very similar to what is in federal statute, and court precedent. Basically, again, just solely focusing on the beneficiary of the assets, the retiree. Mm-hmm. And if they're promoting this ESG that's not providing these mixed motives, then I would say that it's a violation of state law.
And you mentioned, so let's separate out a bit. You mentioned Kentucky Attorney General. What did he do, and why is that good? And then I don't know if there's a Democrat AG who's a counterexample. Separating like the attorneys general and what they can do versus state legislators. Obviously, if they're passing legislation, could do more.
Yeah. So Daniel Cameron in Kentucky wrote a very good advisory opinion, basically just saying why the ESG investing that the asset managers are pursuing is a violation of state law. Again, citing Fifth Third Bank v. Dudenhofer and other provisions in statute. In Indiana, AG Todd Brokita wrote another one. Louisiana has written one. And what's good about these letters is that it basically exposes the asset managers to legal liability and the pension fund board for that matter. And so this is, I think that in the case that, somebody wanted to file a lawsuit and basically say, I believe you're in breach of your fiduciary duty, a lot of this can be used as to bolster that argument. I think that it's something that hasn't been highlighted as much, but I think it's something that's important. And if that's the case, and then it's successful, suit successful, then you basically require that the pension fund boards have to remove assets that are being mismanaged and give it to another asset management firm that will be maximizing returns.
So we have some good models there that other attorneys general can follow. Daniel Cameron in Kentucky, good example there. So shifting to the legislative side of things, that's where we get more tricky. And I think we have more concern that somebody could pursue something that would be not the greatest idea. So is there a model there and principles there that, folks should be looking for their state legislators to follow to make sure that they don't step into another trap and go too far?
Yeah, no, I think for the blue states, going to your state legislator and kind of telling them what's going on in maybe Kentucky or another red state, and telling them, I think that maybe what our AG is writing is maybe not in line with what is outlined in state law and in court precedent, and maybe should be scrutinized. And then again, I think it always gets back to elections too. I think it's making sure that there's more Republicans that are in office that are focused on financial returns and not a bunch of ancillary criteria such as ESG is paramount to ensuring that publicly traded companies are able to continue to provide adequate cash flows and have sound balance sheets and can continue to provide revenue back and pass that down to their investors.
I'm going to fight with the motion sensor lights, which is really highly irritating. So in model policies, we've had a lot of discussion about different models. What are the best models? What do you think are good models for state legislatures in terms of actual legislation?
No, again, I think that the ALEC model bill is the way to go, and it's related to state pensions. It was again focusing on pecuniary factors. I should point out actually at the federal level, Representative Andy Barr from Kentucky has a bill called the Ensuring Sound Guidance Act that's very similar to the ALEC model bill. But what that does actually is it amends what's called the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which is federal statute and is overseen by the Department of Labor. And that applies actually to 401ks, so defined contribution plans, defined benefit plans for private employees. So that's one that basically, for those retirement funds, that would be requiring them to focus on financial returns. Mike Braun in the Senate from Indiana has a bill very similar to that as well, kind of codifying some of the rules that the Trump administration had tried to pursue. And so I think there's some good progress there. And actually, and I'll point out one last thing, is that it's been reported recently that the Biden Department of Labor is going to be issuing, I think before the end of the year, some new regulations amending ERISA to basically, if not require, then basically allow the consideration of ESG factors in investment decision making, which would, from our estimation, would be very bad in that it would degrade the financial performance of firms in the long run and would harm shareholder returns as well.
So one more question from the chat. What can taxpayers do to push back against these policies? So is there anything taxpayers can do?
Well, right now, go out. I'd say go out and vote. I think there are a lot of conservative Republicans out there that understand the benefit of financial returns. And then, I think, voicing your opinion to, voicing your opinion to folks who are not up for reelection or still in office, and just, asking questions like, are we sure we're, is our state pension fund, are they in line with state law, or are they, is this what they're pursuing illegal? Want some clarification on that. So I think that's a good way to approach it.
And maybe, are there tools out there, so that they could have a better idea of how their state is doing on this? Right? Where would they go to say, to understand if they need to push their state to action, or if it's more, everything's fine, just, maybe be on the lookout for bad legislation, or somebody getting into office and doing something negative?
Yeah, I think just, obviously, besides elections, I think just, go into your representative's office. I used to work in the U.S. Senate, and we'd always have constituents come in and voice their opinion or write into their member. And I think just being vocal about it is the best way to do it. I think a lot of times the other side out vocalizes us, and I think that's what, in a lot of ways, is a powerful force in shifting the public perception. So I think, we need to be a little more vocal on our side.
Yeah. And so you're going to have to remain vigilant. Maybe that's something we can put out. I mean, Bryan's written some good articles on this, but maybe we can put together something that's a bit ahead of legislative session, which again, we have a few months, but pointing out where states need to make progress, if they've done something that's bad, if their pension funds are misbehaving, maybe highlighting, where that's happening specifically. So folks know that, okay, in my state, here's what I need to focus on. Here's what I need to do. And then certainly when we see active legislation, and it doesn't look like we'll get Representative Rommel back, bad reception. We apologize for that. We'll have to get him on a future podcast in some way, shape, or form. Folks like Representative Rommel who are working on this, they'll lead some legislative efforts to pass legislation to address protecting these principles. So that's something we can certainly write more about, highlight that. So definitely stay tuned to Americans for Tax Reform, ATR.org, and what Bryan's working on. And we'll make sure to keep folks informed about what's happening there. Because, in some situations, I think not having something happen is the ideal. So there may not be much to do other than remain vigilant. So let me thank Bryan again. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you carrying the conversation here. You've done a lot of research into this, and it's great to have you on talking about what's been going on in this issue area. It's gotten a ton of attention. It's become a very hot button topic. So we'll certainly stick with it. So thanks, Bryan, for joining us. Again, you can find his work, all of our work at ATR.org. And thanks for the questions for the chat. Appreciate you following along. And the podcast will be on whatever, iTunes, what do we call it now? Apple Podcasts, and all your favorite podcast apps if you want to catch the recording, and available on YouTube. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate you joining, and have a great weekend.
Take care.